Hi guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys have all been having a good week. It's almost the holiday season, so number 3 of the ugly Christmas sweaters. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about the last part of our 3-part series, and this is on Bruce McArthur himself. If you've watched the previous ones, I'm so happy. I hope you guys liked the content. I know it was really long, and I'm going to try to make this one not so long. There's just so much information. And when you do a 3-part series, it's easier to go into the information and give more of it. So if you guys like the 3-part series, if you guys are enjoying these series, let me know. And that way, I know that we can do more. Once again, hopefully you guys have subscribed, have hit the like button, the notifications, and maybe left some comments or shared. This information is really useful. It is for educational or entertainment purposes only. And if you guys do choose to leave a comment, please no hate. There's enough hate in the world right now. We're just talking about things that are interesting to us, maybe other information you guys know that I don't know. As you guys know, I try to deeply research these things, and every once in a while, it can be hard to coordinate information. I like to look at multiple sources. Sometimes things can seem a little bit different, or it can seem like I'm wrong about things, but we'll get into that. I do have my research notes, of course, today because I'm going to need them. There's a lot of information and I just don't want to leave anything out. So let's get right into it. So a couple amendments that I want to make. With respect to Mallory Crescent, Moore Avenue actually intersects Mallory Crescent. It's like an offshoot of it. So 53 Mallory Crescent and Moore Avenue aren't exactly side by side like I had previously thought. It was bothering me, so I looked it up. It is an offshoot, and the ravine does divide it and leads down to the Don Valley. I do want you guys to keep in mind Moore Avenue. There's a little bit of other information we're going to talk about with respect to that place. Mallory Crescent itself, the homeowners, I do know their names. With respect to them, I'm going to refer to them as just the homeowners. They didn't do anything wrong in this case, so it's really not fair to identify them and make people believe that they had some type of involvement. I know at the very start of the investigation, there was talk that Bruce McArthur may have had an accomplice. Obviously, it doesn't appear so, but I just wanted to let you guys know about that. With respect to Andrew Kinsman, I didn't know his age. I thought that he was in his 50s, his early 50s. He was actually 49. And for some reason, and I apologize for this, I said that Sarouche went missing in April. He and Salim's timelines I had mixed up. He actually went missing in August 15th of 2015 was when Sarouche went missing. He had left his home and then never came back again, obviously. The reason why I said Project Houston started in 2013 was because the 3 men were not linked together until the spring of 2013. Project Houston itself was launched November 12th of 2012. There is a source within the missing from the village, not in the village, but from the village. There's a source, they talked to a police source within there that verified that, as well as certain journalistic articles that came out at that time that would also identify like that. I felt more comfortable with saying the spring because then all 3 men were definitely connected by then. Now, with respect to the original, the November 12th one, that was specifically just to research Scanda's murder. And it's actually really interesting. Police received a tip from a man in Switzerland, and this man was a credible source. He had given police in Switzerland and areas in there in Europe, he had given them information before that had turned out to be true. So with respect to this, he said that a man from the Toronto area or someplace near Toronto had been on this particular website, I'm not going to name the site, but it is a cannibalism site. You can go there and talk about like your fantasies of wanting to eat people or wanting to be eaten. You can meet up with people from here. You can take things further depending on what area you choose to navigate on this website. I don't know if the website is still in existence, but it was at this point in time. This man was later identified as a man named Alex Brunton. Now, of course, we know he didn't murder Skanda, but he was active on the website and he knew Skanda by sight. Apparently, Remington, which is like a strip club, was a place that both of them, both Alex Brunton and Skanda, had been to. So he did know him from sight. But like 2 days, I mean, I could see how the police would feel that he was like a very credible suspect, because 2 days after Skanda disappeared, he actually looked up non-consensual torture. He was active on this website. He knew a man named Nathan, and we're going to get into that in a second. He knew Skanda by sight, so it seemed like a really credible lead, but of course they interrogated him and looked into him, and there was not a connection. He was arrested on other charges. I'm pretty sure they were child pornography charges. But he told them that all he was doing was writing about his fantasies. The reason why the name Nathan is up in the air, is something that we know about, is that it was a name used by Luka Magnotta, who actually had stripped at Remington. So they also thought that it was possible Luka Magnotta killed Skanda. Obviously, we know he didn't, but it seems like there was a connection between Alex Brunton and Luka Magnotta. Whether there was or not, I can't be certain, but it seemed like there may have been one. With regard to Basir, I tried as hard as I could to find out what the connection between him and Bruce McArthur was. Now, you'll remember that I said a couple of his friends remembers them meeting or them dating, but I also went deeper into that, and I was able to ascertain that there was a piece of paper with one of his, Bruce McArthur's, dating website names on it. So one of his screen names, and it was Silver Fox 51. This same website name was in an email that Skanda also had. So that was the link there. They had obviously both known him. We know that Skanda did for sure. But it was obvious that at the very least, Basir was talking to Bruce McArthur or had met up with him before. It does seem like a pattern with Bruce McArthur that he meets up with these people a few times before murder, but I can't say for sure if that's what he did with all of them. I do also want to make mention again about Basir's car. If you guys remember, it was found on Moore Avenue. Now, at first I thought that this was just because, like, obviously Bruce McArthur was trying to get rid of it, or maybe he was like trying to make it seem like he disappeared into the ravine to have an assignation with somebody and, you know, it never came back. But from what I know, Bruce McArthur at the Christmas season around this time was house sitting for another couple that lived on Moore Ave. When they came home, there was a brown stain on their carpet, and Bruce McArthur told them he spilled Coca-Cola. So it would seem that he more than likely murdered Basir at their home. I think this is just absolutely crazy. I feel really bad for these poor homeowners that had no idea. I don't know if police tested that stain, but it would seem like this was the more likely thing that had happened. Sorry guys, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling that great today either, so that's why unfortunately I will have to refer to my notes. My brain is kind of a little fuzzy right now. I also want to point out I made a really big mistake and I called Insignia. He's actually a detective inspector. I think he's head of homicide now, but don't quote me. The police chief at the time was Mark Saunders. I was calling him detective or like inspector, and then I started calling him the chief of police. I'm really sorry about that. McArthur's van was found in Oshawa. I said Ottawa, that was an accident, but it was found in the Oshawa region. We're going to get into that a little bit more. And Karima knew that her husband, this would be Basir, went missing, she had her sister or brother-in-law call the police force and they looked into it. So now we're going to get into Bruce McArthur, his life and times, basically. So Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur was born October 8th of 1951 in Lindsay, Ontario. He grew up on a farm on Palestine Road. The closest town to that is Argyle, and this is in the Kawartha Lakes region, which is a little bit further up north. He had one older sister, so there was his mom, his dad, the older sister, and then himself. He was the youngest child and the only male child, but he didn't suffer from not having other brothers and sisters because his family would take in foster children. Okay, so these children used to be called home children. Basically, from what I gather, in the 19th century, the end of it, people from England used to send their kids over to Canada to work on farms, basically to keep them out of trouble and to give them something to do, probably more opportunities, etc. So they were known as home children. Now, a lot of these kids, unfortunately, suffered a great deal on the farms. So Canada trying to get away from that. So the practice was at this point in time, when the McArthurs were running their farm, that troubled children from Toronto and various other areas would come and work on the farms, which were essentially foster homes, a boarding school, and a work camp, all in one. So he had many foster brothers and sisters throughout his whole time at the farm, and his parents were known as good people. But McArthur himself often thought that the workload fell more squarely on his shoulders than anybody else's, and he started to resent his dad a lot because of this. He felt like he was being punished and like he was never good enough, and there's further reasoning for this, which we will get into. Now, his mom and dad used to fight a lot about religion. His mom was Catholic and his dad was Protestant, and so they'd fight about religion, and Bruce McArthur would side with his mother during this point in time because he resented his dad so much. When he went to school, he was known by several students for being a teacher's pet, or for trying to be a teacher's pet. Like, if anybody, any of the boys, because this was like one of the old school one room schoolhouses, if any of the boys did anything that they shouldn't be doing, or breaking any rules, he'd be the first to tell on them, because he was very socially awkward. He didn't really fit in, and he was shy, and he didn't really have a lot of friends. So when he was growing up and reaching his teen years, his dad became harder on him. And Bruce McArthur himself thinks it's because his dad sensed that he was a gay man, and he was trying to work, basically, through hard labor, those desires out of him. Now, when Bruce went to high school, he was shy and awkward, but he was also baby-faced. He always had like a baby face. And even though he had square shoulders, he was kind of chunky, and he had an effeminate manner. So he figures his dad was trying to work this out of him. He went to high school in Fenelon Falls, Fenelon Falls, Fenlon Falls, which I think was one of the bigger towns in the Kawartha Lakes. That's where he went to high school. He was not a good student, and he was shy once again. That's what people remember about him. They think that he may have had an undiagnosed learning disability, and this could have been why he was a poor student. But it's interesting to note that when he was in high school, he met his wife there, and the two started dating. They got married about 5 years after graduation, which he graduated in 1969. So this would be about 1974 when they were 23. The both of them got married. So I'm sure this made his dad more approving of him because he was married. During the time that they were married as well, like during those first years that they were dating, Bruce McArthur was able to get a business degree from a college in Barrie. So a 2-year business degree. He was able to get that. he and his wife moved to Toronto sometime in the late 70s. He worked at the Eaton store on Yonge Street, so that's actually really near to the village. Could have been then that he started going into the village, I don't know, but he would have been acquainted with the village. Now, like we discussed in the first film, the village in general was not known as the village then, but it was a budding village, let's just say. It was starting to be the place that it was. He then started at some point in time his dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor and had to go live in a nursing home. I think this really scared Bruce McArthur, and around this point in time when his dad was diagnosed, his mom started seeing another man. To Bruce McArthur, this was infidelity, so he cut all ties with his mother. And he started developing a better relationship with his dad. He would go to the Kawartha Lakes region as much as he possibly could to look after his dad and look after the family farm. His dad died in 1981, but his mom died when he was 26, which would have been probably about 1977. She died of breast cancer. Now, I don't know if they ever repaired their relationship, he and his mother, but I know with his father, he became very close, and his father finally gave him the approval that he had been seeking before he died. In 1979, Bruce McArthur and his wife moved to the Oshawa area. He started to work for the McGregor Sock Company, and he was basically a traveling salesman of sorts, but he was able to eventually become the account manager of the company. He was able to become the account manager for another menswear company at this time. So it would appear that they were doing okay. Like I said, his father passed away in 1981, and in the early 80s, it would seem, they had a daughter, I'm not going to name her, and then a couple years later they had a son. So these children were born in Oshawa. And Bruce McArthur became heavily Protestant at that time, which seems a little bizarre to me because he used to side with his mother about Catholicism, but he very much embraced the Protestant church, and he did a lot of activities there, and he actually sang in the church choir. So it seems like some of his life at least was centered around the church. Both of his kids, though, were socially awkward. They had social problems like him, where they didn't quite fit in. And Bruce McArthur could be especially hard on his son about this. His son did admit to a girlfriend at one point in time that his father had been physically abusive toward him. His son also developed behavioral problems by the early 90s. Now, I feel that they felt that he would grow out of these problems, but their son never did. It was during this period in the 90s, the early 90s, that Bruce McArthur had his first affair with another man. He was finally realizing what he, I'm sure, knew deep down inside, and what it would seem his father knew, that he was gay. He knew he was gay. So he had this affair, and I believe it lasted for a couple years. He was not ready, though, at this point in time to tell his family, and he didn't really want to rock the boat. And I have to add that if you guys remember, any of us that remember out there, it was about 1995 that the internet like super exploded, and this helped Bruce McArthur. During this time, he discovered the internet dating websites, and these were things that he would use basically until his arrest to meet other men or converse with other men and then meet other men. This is what he did, and the internet became a very useful tool for him. They also seemed to have money problems at this point in time, and Bruce McArthur essentially stopped having relations with his wife because he didn't want to give her an STI. I guess that was nice of him. he told his wife and then later his children in the late 90s that he was gay. Now, he and his wife did live together for another year after that. And remember, they had these financial problems, so I'm sure those would have had to have been somehow cleaned up. Or they were trying to work through those financial problems, not marriage problems. Bruce definitely said that he was gay, and they did reside together. His family seems to have taken it, well enough. It seems that they were supportive enough of him, so maybe they knew in some way. It doesn't seem like he suffered from his ex-wife not liking him, or from the children not liking him. It seems like there was some type of support there. He then relocated in either 97 or 98 to Toronto proper. And this is where he had his first relationship with a man that was out in public. They were both out, and Bruce McArthur was 46 at the time. And they moved in together at the Thorncliffe Park apartments. Like Thorncliffe Park has a lot of apartment buildings. They moved in together to one of these apartments. The relationship didn't work out. They dated for about 4 years, but they remained friends. Bruce McArthur wanted a commitment, and it seems like, once again, this is a running theme. He wanted a commitment. His partner at the time did not want that level of commitment. He was not ready for it. And so they broke up, but they remained friends, and they remained roommates. I am pretty sure this is the roommate that Bruce McArthur would refer to. If you'll remember with John, hurry up, my roommate's coming home. I'm pretty sure they remained living together. There's no, I read nothing about him moving out, so I'm pretty sure they remained together. During this time, Bruce McArthur also saw a psychiatrist. He was feeling depressed. Obviously, his marriage had broken down. Even though he was embracing who he really was at this time, he also had, to deal with that. And he did have to deal with probably, like, the deaths of his parents were recent, but I'm sure that had something to do with it. And, having to tell his kids, I'm sure that had something to do with it. Embarking on this new life. He said that he suffered from depression at this point in time, and the money problems. If you'll remember, they did have the money problems. And he was prescribed Prozac. Now, he was able to work on his financial problems, and basically by 2001, because he had declared bankruptcy, in 1999. Much like, if you guys remember, Sarouche and Basir had both, I think Hamid may have as well, had all declared bankruptcy. And he was released from the bankruptcy in 2001. Halloween of 2001. Now, Halloween is a big party, as we all know, but it's also a huge party in the village. It is very much celebrated. So a man who we're going to call David, that's what he is known as. It's a pseudonym. I know there are interviews with this man. I believe his real name is given there, but I'm going to call him David because he deserves that respect. He deserves the respect of the privacy. Now, David was a sex worker, and he lived at the Co-op apartment high rise. This is interesting because Hamid later lived there. He lived there off and on with a partner. I don't know if they were still living together at the time of his disappearance, but I know he did live there with a partner. And Bruce McArthur was outside. David was just going into his apartment, and he recognized Bruce. He heard somebody jogging up behind him, and when he turned, he recognized Bruce. Not by name, but he knew him as a former client. And he was super excited to show somebody his costume, so he invited Bruce to come back in with him just to look at the costume. There was no sex involved. He was not going to work that night. That's all he was doing. Bruce McArthur turned around and when David was inserting his key, so obviously David's facing forward, Bruce McArthur hit him with a metal pipe. He did not just hit him once. He basically hit him several times. Now, I believe David was partially in his apartment at this point in time, and he was able to get to a phone. And Bruce McArthur, like, completely changed. He was begging him not to call 911 after hitting this man. This man's head was a bloody mess. After hitting this man, he's like, oh, don't call 911, don't call 911. And of course, David was like, no, I'm calling 911. And he even went so far as to try to rip the phone from right out of the wall, but he wasn't able to. And as soon as David was able to get an operator on the line, Bruce took off. Now, he drifted in and out of consciousness, David did, but he was finally able to get a hold of someone from 911 and give the description of Bruce, obviously. Now, Bruce McArthur kind of one-upped him because he turned himself into police. This is also a pattern. He turned himself into police, and there's no way, I mean, he could say that he did not attack this man. He told police he blacked out. He has no idea what happened. He had no idea why he would do such a thing. He doesn't remember the crime. He essentially blacked out. When he came to, David was a mess. Now, David had to have 5 stitches for this, and I'm ascertaining that he did have some type of trauma due to this. You were hit in the head several times with a metal pipe. Remember the metal pipe too. Obviously, Bruce McArthur was arrested at this time, and in his wallet, they found the business cards that David had. David had business cards made up to advertise his escort services. They found this, so they knew there was a connection between the two. McArthur got off basically with a slap on the wrist. He was forced to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist could not identify any reason why he would have blacked out. They couldn't identify any behavioral problems, antisocial problems, personality disorders, nothing like that. They could not identify any disorder that would lead for him to have done this to another person. Another person he really didn't know that well either, and it was a random attack. Like, it was a very surprise attack. Obviously, McArthur probably had this premeditated, because the reason he said he was carrying around this metal bar was to fend off hustlers. So, anyway, I know, it's galling. He really did not have any reason to have blacked out. Now, the psychiatrist, said that he was at minimal risk to reoffend. Minimal risk to reoffend. And basically, he was not prosecuted the way he should have been for this crime. I mean, this, to me, it seems like it's a definite assault causing great bodily harm, number one, or even attempted murder at the most. But basically, all Bruce McArthur got was 3 years probation, 1 year of house arrest. He had to stay away from the village for the 3 years. So he was not allowed to have contact with the village. He wasn't allowed to contact sex workers. He had to do 100 hours of community service. That was it. No jail time was served. He did not have to serve any jail time. So this was in 2003 that this sentence, so to speak, happened. So Bruce McArthur got off lucky. I'm sure the police were thinking later on in hindsight, but at this point in time, it's hindsight. It was also, he also had to attend anger management classes. Now, it is also during some point at this time that Bruce McArthur started working as Santa Claus in the Agincourt Mall in Toronto. He worked there for at least 2 years as Santa Claus. Police assume it was much longer than that. And he would essentially dress up as Santa Claus and talk to our children while he was entertaining whatever fantasies he was entertaining. It's just very galling to me that the man was Santa Claus, but he was. He was only allowed to leave his apartment at this point in time, of course, for work and for any pre-approved appointments, like if he had to go to the doctor or anything like that. The judge himself said that Mr. MacArthur seemed like a nice man or a good guy, and that he didn't think he'd ever do it again. So basically, that's why he got this sentence. David, of course, would have to live with the memories for the rest of his life, but this is what happened with Bruce MacArthur. And I want to say that I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was part of the community and that he was a sex worker. So he was not taken as seriously as he should have been. In the early 2000s, Bruce MacArthur and a man named Roger Horan went into business together, essentially. The business had been Roger's business first. He was the designer. It's the landscaping business. He was the designer and basically the contact end of it. He needed someone to be the workhorse. And Bruce MacArthur did have a green thumb. I can't say that he did not. So Bruce was the working end and he was the contact and design end. And they worked really well together. They were both gay men too. And they worked really well together. They got a lot of clients in a very short time, and business seemed to be going really well for them. So well that Bruce MacArthur was eventually able to buy Roger out and keep the client list and everything else. And I know a lot of people were really amazed by his flower displays. Apparently these were really amazing pieces that he was able to do. He was, for all intents and purposes, a fairly good landscaper. It was during this time in the early 2000s that Bruce MacArthur's sister contacted the owners of 53 Mallory Crescent. These owners were actually family friends of the MacArthurs. I don't know how much they knew Bruce, but they were family friends of the MacArthurs, the sister for sure. And she basically had a deal for them. Essentially the deal was if Bruce could store his equipment in their double garage that they didn't use, they weren't using the garage, and on their property, if he could do that, then Bruce would landscape their house for them. So it was a business arrangement, so to speak, but Bruce MacArthur did have a key to their home because he would have to let himself in and out of the garages and stuff like that. Now we know he hid a lot more at this property, but that was the initial deal. That's why he landscaped for them, and that's why he was so acquainted with 53 Mallory Crescent. The owners of Mallory Crescent are very nice people. They're very charitable people, and I don't think they had any idea that Bruce was like this. They described him as a nice enough man, but they said he didn't seem very smart to them. Like he was not very sharp, and apparently like he would not get jokes very often. So just to have that out there. Of course, Bruce MacArthur was living in the Thorncliffe Park apartments at this point in time, so he wouldn't have had access to a place to store his tools for the business. In 2006, Bruce MacArthur's probation era was over, so he was allowed back into the village. Now, he did join, it's almost like a coffee klatch, like a club for gay fathers. And they would like go out for breakfast and have coffee and stuff like that. So he was active in certain parts in the community. People could see him at the Second Cup. He would, if you remember the first video, we talked about the Second Cup and its importance, the steps to the village. And he would go there, and he also started being a regular, I should say, not acquainting, being a regular at bars like Zippers, the Black Eagle, and Woody's, which we know from the second video were all places that his victims had also frequented. So he became a regular there. People would be able to recognize him from there. Eventually, his son was convicted of criminal harassment. I know. He would call up a woman in the Kitchener-Waterloo area and say just really graphic, not nice things to her. And what's interesting to know is that she was also part of the community. This woman had a partner, and he would say things about them. So of course he was arrested. And one of the conditions of his release was that he had to live with his dad. So whatever freedoms Bruce McArthur thought he had at the time, his son started living there as well. So it would have been the roommate, Bruce, and the son. I don't know how long the son lived there for. I just know that at this point in time, he did live there, and he would help Bruce with his landscaping business. Now, it was also during this time that people, 53 Mallory Crescent owners, but other clients noticed that he also started going through hands, going through hired labor. Quite fast, but also they noticed that most of the people that he hired were either of Southeast Asian descent or Middle Eastern descent. Skanda and McArthur's relationship, we know, began in 1999, and so by at least the 2000s, they were definitely dating. We know it wasn't a good relationship. Friends remember Bruce McArthur as being very controlling and obsessive about Skanda, and like they would it was tumultuous. They would break up and be back together, break up and eventually always find themselves together. But even when they weren't together, he would like try to tell Skanda to do things, like what to do, like how to design his own house and things like that. He would do this. He was very controlling and very obsessive. And McArthur wanted a commitment once again in this relationship, which seems like a running theme, perhaps even as far back as his first affair. But Skanda didn't want that. I mean, during their relationship, he would have been young. He would have been in his 30s. He wasn't ready for that. And Skanda identified as bisexual. So though he dated mostly men, maybe he didn't want to give up dating women as well. He just was not ready for that commitment. And I think that angered Bruce McArthur to some extent, obviously. They often spent their time, sorry, my nose is really itchy today. They often spent their time at either Black Eagle when they were together, which is a leather bar, and you guys know that Bruce McArthur had developed a taste for S&M. I don't know how far back he started to get into the BDSM lifestyle, but he had developed a taste for it, and this is a leather bar. Things of that nature, to some extent, would go on there. And they also spent a lot of time at Bruce McArthur's apartment. A friend remembers that the last night he saw Skanda, which would have been September 5th of 2010, because remember, Skanda was officially missing as of September 6th, that they had met for a drink and to just play a quick round of pool, things of that nature. Because remember, Skanda was a pool shark. He did love him some pool. He remembers Skanda getting a phone call, which he believes was from Bruce McArthur, and leaving shortly after that. And of course, we know that after the 6th, Skanda was not seen again. So it's interesting to note that Bruce McArthur helped to look for Skanda. He would pass out missing posters, missing persons posters with Skanda's face on it, and that he was also really interested in the investigation. He would often ask Skanda's friends how things were going, if they had heard anything, things to that extent. Now, we know from a lot of other killers, including the Christine Jessup video, if you guys have watched that, that Calvin Hoover was also involved in the in the search for Christine Jessup. So this seems like a thing for Bruce McArthur. The Mallory Crescent owner remembers Bruce McArthur with Hamid. Now, the owner only remembers seeing him once, and it seemed like McArthur was mad at Hamid and had basically told her that Hamid would not work out. Like I said, he had a revolving door, so to speak, of workers. So I believe she also sent him an email asking about Hamid, like hoping that it had worked out. And I don't know what the response to it was. But obviously Hamid went missing. So we know he stopped working for him, essentially, because he was murdered. Members of the village remember that after these men went missing, the initial 3, so that would have been Skanda, Basir, and Hamid, they would voluntarily go down to the police department, and they would tell the police every detail about their lives in the hopes that something would be able to be connected to whoever had taken these men. They would have to tell them uncomfortable details that they didn't necessarily want to tell them, about places that they went to, their sexual preferences and practices, things like that. They willingly told this, and they were met with displeasure, disapproval, and bias. But it's also interesting to note that when a friend went in to speak, and I think it was about Hamid, it could have been about Skanda, but when a friend went in to be interviewed to speak about this, the police seemed to have already known who Bruce McArthur was. Now, this was in 2013, and they were asking him basically leading questions like, does this man work outdoors? Do you know if this man is a landscaper? Do you know what kind of work he does? So it almost seemed like they were trying to get him to name Bruce McArthur. But a lot of the friends from the missing men would tell them about Bruce McArthur, especially Skanda's friends and Hamid's friends who knew that they had dated. Would essentially say, you know, there's a guy, Bruce McArthur, you should look into him. Or just mention that they knew that he had a relationship with them. So 2013, Bruce McArthur, definitely on the radar of the police. But I don't think at that point in time they could make the connections, especially since after the cannibalism ring tip and after the Luca Magnotta tip had essentially dried up, these three men became a cold case. They weren't mentioned very much in the media, if at all. And basically it was only on the internet that people talked about them. And they were like armchair sleuths, like what we do, trying to figure out what may have happened to them. So it's interesting to note that these men seem to be forgotten. And as of 2013, of course, it was technically a cold case, their disappearances were. Zippers closed down August 3rd of 2016. And in 2016, Bruce McArthur was arrested again. It was for domestic assault. This man is known as Matt, and we are going to refer to him that way. That is his pseudonym, so respect for him. We're going to call him Matt. Came forward to police. Now, Matt and Bruce McArthur knew each other. Matt was very much still in the closet at this point in time, and they had had an on and off occasional sexual relationship for years at this point. McArthur was like hanging around outside of his like apartment. This is in June. Was hanging around outside of his apartment because he couldn't go into the apartment. And he asked Matt if Matt wanted to go to dinner. I mean, they'd done this several times before, so Matt was like, okay, sure. He showered and then went down. And the two of them went to, I think they must have went separately. They drove to a Tim Hortons parking lot in North Toronto and agreed to hook up. Now, Matt wanted to hook up in his truck, but McArthur said no. He refused because he was more comfortable in his van. And a former partner of Bruce McArthur's recalled calling this van a mobile play area. It was basically, I just want to get it right, guys. His little traveling playroom. That's what the former partner, called Bruce McArthur's van. The seats were removed from the back, so it would give people a lot of space. A tarp, interestingly enough, was on the floor, and on that tarp was a fur coat. So initially, this was consensual. Matt and Bruce McArthur started to become intimate. That was consensual. Sorry, bless you. Things got a little bit rough. And this was still consensual. Matt was okay with a little bit of roughness. And then it got worse. Bruce clamped his hands around Matt's neck and started to choke him. There was no consent to this. Matt never consented to being choked. This was something completely new to him. This was not something he wanted. So he was fighting Bruce off. And he was able to fight Bruce off. And at one point in time, he lunged and went for Bruce's neck and Bruce's throat. And he held him there for a minute and then was able to get out of the van. And he was like, I'm going to call 911. I'm going to call 911. So Bruce, of course, takes off in his van. And Matt, the 911 operator basically told Matt, don't follow him, because Matt wanted to follow Bruce McArthur. I think he was in shock. He had adrenaline going. He was like, this is not right. This is not what I want. So Matt went to the police force, but once again, Bruce McArthur turned himself in. This is also a running theme. When he's in trouble, the first thing he does is saying, oh, I'm a good citizen, I'm turning myself in. Now, this story, of course, was different than the 2003 investigation, because at this point, no bruises were around Matt's neck. I thought they had been, but nothing was seen at this point. But you and I both know, or you guys and I know, a lot of the times when you hit yourself or when something happens to you, a bruise doesn't always show up immediately afterward. So one of them was interviewed and by videotape, and one of them wasn't. So they took Matt's description of what happened, but remember, they did not follow up with photographs. And this was Sergeant Paul, I'm going to call him Gauthier or Gauthier. Remember, I told you, depending on where you live, how to pronounce it. So Gauthier. And of course, Sergeant Paul Gauthier is up on charges. It hasn't gone to trial yet, for misconduct. I think he's got a couple other charges as well, but misconduct is one of the big ones because of how shoddily he handled this. No charges were laid. So even though there is a record of Bruce's arrest that should have went into the police, I think it's Versadex, sorry. It should have gone into Versadex, basically all the cases, and this person's been arrested before. So when I look you up, I mean, they do this all the time when they profile people, when they racially profile people, they'll run your plates, look you up, see that you had an arrest for drug possession 15 years ago, and then they can do what they want, basically. But his name was never entered into Versadex, even though he was arrested, and even though he had been in 2001. I do also want to remind you that when he was done his probation in 2006, his record was expunged at this point in time. So there would have been no record of that arrest unless they actually went through the files and looked for it. It was expunged. It wouldn't have showed up. He was arrested on suspicion of domestic assault charges. That's what it seemed to be because of the relationship between the two of them. But like I said, the charges never stuck. And Bruce McArthur basically said, oh, I didn't know he didn't want to be choked. I thought he was into it. I thought it was consensual. So it became like a he said, and they chose to believe McArthur because they found him credible and believable. I don't know why they didn't find Matt credible, because Matt's story never changed. No matter who you talk to about this, his story has never changed. This is always what took place. And he was angry about that. I would have been angry about that too. I think any of us would have had a lot of anger about that. And of course, what we know happened later, I mean, there should have been definite anger in the community about this. This is twice now that he has assaulted men and essentially gotten away with it. In 2017, when Bruce McArthur became a person of interest in Andrew Kinsman's murder, I kind of made it seem like it was easy for them to identify his plates, because we were only doing, we were looking into the investigation, key dates in it, of course, but not speaking about it in a long, speaking about the process in a long way, because there was so much information in that video. So the way they actually found out that it was Bruce McArthur's van was they had the grainy surveillance photographs, the video of Andrew getting into this van. Now, when I say grainy, I mean grainy. You couldn't tell that there were plates on this. I assumed it was from plates, but you couldn't tell what the plate number was on this. You could just see a man who had a beard getting into this. So then they knew based on times and the fact, I think there had been an email sent out. I think Andrew had sent an email out to his tenant or to his tenants about an issue. And so they would have had like the time that the email was sent out. So based on this, they assumed this was Andrew, and assumed rightly that it was Andrew getting into the van. So what happened was actual detective work for once. They were able to find the make and model of this van. So I believe it was a 2003 or 2004 maroon Dodge Caravan, but it was like the 20th anniversary special. So they were able to see how many people owned this van. Now, of course, there's going to be a few thousand that own this, but they also had the name Bruce from the daybook. So they were able to see how many people named Bruce owned this van, and there were only 5, and Bruce McArthur obviously was one of them. Now, he had tried to hide this van at his daughter's place in Oshawa, and the police were had him under surveillance, right? They were tracking him with the GPS, but they were surveilling him at this point in time too. So they knew it was there. And then one day it just disappeared. And that's why it was at Dom's Auto Parts. That's the name of this place. Once again, I think it's like a salvage plant or place, but it's also like a place where they'll fix things up. But like, once again, I'm not a car person. So I can't be any more descriptive about that. I'm sorry. But they were able to do this. And at that point in time, when they were able to take possession of the van, they found both Salim's and Andrew's blood in it. There was a hidden compartment in the van, and that's where the fur coat was stored. The fur coat comes into play in a little bit. Then, of course, they trailed him and surveyed him until January 18th, 2018, and arrested him, and the rest you guys know. With respect to this arrest, though, and respect to John was a victim, as far as I know. I mean, judging from what we're going to get into, but what we also know from video 2, he was grooming him in a way. So John was a man of color as well. I don't know if he was fully out of the closet at this point in time. I don't know a whole lot about John. Obviously, he's a pseudonym. He doesn't really want to be identified, and that's his right. He was tied to the bed, and now I've heard 2 conflicting reports that he had a bag over his head at one point in time, and he was able to get it off, and then Bruce McArthur taped his mouth. He duct taped his mouth. So, I mean, it seems like he was in the process of being ready to do what he did to everyone else. I've also heard that the bag was actually an S&M mask. Like, they're leather masks. They have eye holes and mouth holes, but usually there's like zippers that you can zip across. So it's a BDSM prop. Now they were able to locate a bag filled with duct tape, rope, BDSM gear, which McArthur called his kink bag. And the white rope is also going to come into play. His kink bag, sorry. Now we're going to get into what happened to each of the victims. Now, I'm going to put out a warning there that for some people, these descriptions might be triggering, but they may also be really graphic. So I tried to tone it down as best I could, because not everybody wants to hear every graphic detail. But these are points that need to be made so you guys can understand exactly what happened to these men. What we do know happened was that McArthur decided against a trial. So essentially, if he had had a trial, it probably would have taken someplace during this year or next year. Who's to say, because of COVID. So, but he decided against a trial. I think the reason, I mean, people have tried to say he did this to spare his victims' families. I doubt it. I really don't think he gave a crap about his victims' families. He may have about his family, but I also believe he didn't want details about his life getting out there, his sexual practices and what he did to these men. We only have cursory information about what he exactly did to these men, But I'm just saying, I don't think he wanted all that stuff out there, and I don't think he wanted all the witnesses, and I don't think he wanted to go through that. They said that this was remorse on his behalf. I don't know if I believe that. I really don't. He's not been diagnosed with any abnormalities or any mental illness that I know of. But I really don't, it really wouldn't seem to me like he's the type of person that felt remorse for what he did. I think he enjoyed every second of what he did, but regardless, maybe he did. I can't say for sure. So police were able to find several documents from his house, and one of these was a USB stick, and the stick contained photographs. So this was the main crux of the investigation, these photographs, because it was like definite proof of what he had done. And you'll understand the reasons why when I say it. The USB stick had 9 subfolders in it, one for each of the victims and one for John. Now, some of these victims were not identified as by name. So one was number 4, number 5, one was Slider, and one was Turkish Guy. I'm assuming that these 4 would have been Sarush, Karishna Kumar, Dean. Although it's strange because Dean's street name was Laser, so maybe he knew him as Slider. I'm not sure. And Turkish Guy was Salim. So it would appear that with 4 of these men, Basir included, he had had previous relationships with. I'm going to assume that he also maybe sought out Dean for solicitation purposes, for relations. It would seem like he had some type of connection to all of these men through longer relationships. Like, he didn't just kill them the first time he met them there. These photos had been deleted from the computer. Now, if you'll remember, it seems like Bruce McArthur was pretty in tune with the investigation. So he knew about their missing posters. He had them. He had pictures of them. He also knew enough to stop for a little bit after 2012 and like in 2013 when people were starting to question things more, Project Houston. I think he also had news articles about Salim and about Andrew's disappearances in his apartment. So it seems like he was keeping tabs on this, which is probably also why he got rid of the van and bought a new van from Windsor, and a new SUV type van from Windsor, and started driving that around. It would seem like he was trying to get rid of that evidence so police would be off him, especially because he was a person of interest in 2017 for sure in Andrew's disappearance. So police were able to recover, of course, the deleted files. We know they're able to do this. Andrew Kinsman. McArthur had over 100 photos of Andrew Kinsman. A lot of them were him in life. Like we said, they'd had a decade-long relationship. So he had photos of him in life. 18 of the photos were of him in death. It essentially seems like he was stalking these men through photos, grooming these men through photos. Like, the photos were in the subfolders, but the fact that he had like taken these life photos and put them in there as well, it's almost like it was definitely premeditated. Like these were definite people that he was going to victimize. Like, there's no question that it wasn't first degree murder. It was definitely first degree murder, because it would seem like he watched these people, and not like creepy, like I've got a lens on you type watching. Like, obviously he was taking pictures of them. They were known to each other, but it would seem like he had been planning this for months before he actually did it. Like I said, 18 of these photos were death photos. Andrew was staged in 2 different poses. The garrote so when I say garrote, once again, I'm calling it a garrote. I don't know what other people call it, was the nylon rope, the white nylon rope. I thought it was like either wire or string or leather or something like that, but it was a white nylon rope and it was twisted with a metal pipe. Now remember, he beat David with a metal pipe. So I'm just saying it seems like a metal pipe seems to be one of his MOs as well. So in some of these, the garrote was still around Andrew's neck. In others of these, it was taken off, but you could see like the ligature marks as well. And he also, I want to point out, had started to do this with John. His subfolder, John's subfolder, he had taken pictures of him in life and put them into the subfolder. And we know that Andrew was killed on or about June 26th, definitely June 26th of 2017. And the reason we know some of the death dates was because the photos were stamped. With respect to Skanda, there were 3 photos of Skanda found in his subfolder. As well as one of the photos was of the missing persons picture from the missing missing persons poster. I'm sorry, I said it already. Of him and Basir and Hamid. He had a photo of that on there. So obviously very much following the investigation. His bracelet, he also had a bracelet. It was engraved, I think it was leather engraved with the name Skanda. It was found in Bruce McArthur's residence. And McArthur had emailed himself one of these photos, death photos, of Skanda just days before he killed Celine, essentially, so he can relive the crimes. Basir. No photos of Basir were found on Bruce McArthur's computer, but he did have a sub photo or a sub file and the wanted picture. The missing. For some reason, I just keep having these images of Billy the Kid. Don't ask me why. We were actually talking about him on the weekend, so it's in there. These photos, the missing poster was in there. With respect to Hamid, he had 44 photos of Hamid in the computer. In some of these photos, I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to be really respectful. In some of these photos, Hamid was dressed after death in a fur coat with a fur hat and a cigar coming out of his mouth. The fur coat seems to come into play with a lot of people. I don't know if it's a prop of sorts of something. It's obviously something he liked to do, was to dress these men up after death. I don't know why. Unless somebody actually does an interview with him, these questions won't be answered, and I doubt he's going to give interviews, but I'm just saying. And if you'll remember, his remains were obviously found in the ravine. Sarouche. They had photos of him showing his eyes taped open and the white rope around his neck, and a cigar up to his lips. They also had photos of him wearing the coat, the fur hat, and the cigar again. And a search revealed that the white rope was actually in McArthur's apartment. So I want to say, I would assume he just cut different lengths. Like, for some reason, he had to take photos of the garrote as well. So it must have been meaningful to him in some way. Krishna Kumar, 5 photos existed of him. They were of him on McArthur's bed, naked. His head was resting on, like, it was either a tarp, which, I mean, makes sense because of the van, but it was either on a tarp or like garbage bags. And McArthur shaved his head after murdering him for some reason. Now, with respect to the clippings because like I told you, I think in the second video, that McArthur would had bags of hair clippings from men. I don't think it was from all of the men. I think it was just from certain ones. And these were actually found at the Moore Avenue place. I don't know how he hid them there, but that's what I know, that they were found. So I think some were in his apartment and some were there. He was basically planting evidence in plain sight because these people trusted him. The people that he knew, the Moore Avenue homeowners and the Mallory Crescent homeowners, trusted him. With respect to Dean, he had numerous photos of Dean, both unconscious and dead, in the computer. Sorry, guys, I really have to take a drink. I'm sorry. Excuse me. He was naked, wearing the fur coat, and had the white rope around his neck. It was tangled in with his necklace. And if you'll remember, I did say that Dean's jewelry was found in the apartment. It was tangled in with the necklace. So now they have photographic proof that that's definitely Dean's jewelry. So they had the photos of Dean like that. And with respect to Salim, MacArthur said that he had picked up a homeless man, invited him back to his house for relations, said he'd give him $40 for this, and that the man left of his own accord, which we know was not true. This man is Salim. Now, Salim did move around a lot, and he would often be seen carrying like a silver suitcase. I think it was a wheeling silver suitcase. So he was often seen with that. Now, it might lead a lot of you to believe that he was homeless. I think a lot of reports say that he was homeless, but his friends did say that at this point in time, he had secured an apartment. He used to stay with friends a lot as well. That at this point in time, he had secured an apartment. And if you'll remember, he was working towards becoming a peer counselor. So he was basically, he was able to rein in his addiction at that point in time. This would be just before death, before he died, before Bruce MacArthur preyed on him. So I just want to point that out, that MacArthur did say this was a homeless man. This was not a homeless man. He was the one that his photos were stored underneath Turkish guy. And in some of the photos, he's unconscious, wearing the hat, wearing the coat, cigar out of his mouth. Some of them he's shirtless. Some of them he's wearing like a checkered shirt, like a plaid shirt. In others, he's naked, bound, with ligature marks on his neck. And he's also posed in the fur coat, like I said. In some, his beard is shaved off. So MacArthur actually shaved his beard off after death. So we're going to tie up some loose ends at this point in time, because I'm sure you guys all have questions. I do too. Once again, a lot of these questions are just going to be my opinion, because unless someone does an interview with Bruce MacArthur or is able to speak to him and find out the details, which I don't believe he'd ever give people anyway, we won't exactly know. But this was a man that preyed on his own community. Okay, he was part of the community, and he preyed on men from his own community because he knew he could. Because he knew that the men he chose, either homeless men or immigrants, would more than likely not have family in the area, maybe not have very many friends. A lot of them were closeted, so their families wouldn't particularly know. Some of them, I mean, Basir was from Brampton, and Sarouche had lived in Barrie before. So, you know, some of them weren't necessarily connected to the village. He figured it would just be easy. He figured this would be very easy. No one would care. And I think he knew about the hostility of the police force. I think he definitely knew. So we're tying up loose ends right now. So MacArthur is currently housed at Millhaven. If you don't know where Millhaven is, it's close to Kingston. And I think the nearest town to it is a place called Bath. It appears to be about 22 kilometers from Kingston. And initially Millhaven was built because the Kingston pen was in disrepair, and they needed to be able to repair it. So, and then of course Millhaven became so much more. We know it's a maximum security prison, but this is where Bruce MacArthur is. And at some point in time in 2019, he was actually assaulted by another man enough to have to go to the hospital. So somebody did get their piece out of Bruce McArthur. He obviously must have been in the general population at that point in time. Like I said, friends who knew about the relationships that went on describe him with these other men as controlling and obsessive. And that it seemed like he wanted commitment from everybody. I'm going to put forth that his act of killing them was the ultimate commitment. Was him ensuring that they would never be able to leave him again. I think this was a lot about power and control for him, especially like the way he dressed them up and posed them around after, like he had complete control over his victims. And there are some people out there that do believe that when serial killers kill, to some extent, I think Jeffrey Dahmer actually said it. It's like those people, Ted Bundy did too. Those people become part of you. So it's like the ultimate fusing together of the two of them. He was obviously able to get these men to trust him. He had significant relationships, decade-long relationships with some of these men. And it's probably a lot easier to kill somebody who assumes you're a friend, who assumes you're a partner, who you assume you know, than it would be for a stranger. However, I do want to point out that he was active on the dating websites like we discussed before, and he had several screen names. Silver Fox 51 was just one of them. So he was well versed in meeting men from the internet, and maybe it was his way to set people up. Maybe it was his way to groom people, meet them a few times, have sexual relations with them, attack them when they least suspect it, which is basically in the act of intimacy itself. They would not have assumed he's going to kill them, and that's what he did. It's unbelievable to me that he chose Andrew Kinsman, a man that he had known for so long, a man that he had hundreds of photos with, a man who was so well known in the community. Andrew was definitely his downfall. There is not anybody out there that would say that he wasn't, because he picked a man so well known. Whereas perhaps his other victims, aside from Skanda, we know that Skanda was fairly well known in the community. He chose someone that was that well known. Was it because he wanted to get caught? I don't think so, to be honest with you. Because he'd been following the investigation so much. And before Andrew, he was never on anybody's radar. In 2013, he was basically just a person of interest because he knew all three of the men, even though I would think to myself, if I was part of the police force, wow, this man has a connection to all of these men, and other men are mentioning him in interviews. But we also know in 2016 and in 2001, he had assaulted men. I would think that a little bit more police work would make you want to check this man out. But like I said, in every one of his interviews, he was very believable. He was a very believable man. This makes me tend to think he may have been a psychopath to some extent, but there is no evidence that a psychiatric order or that a psychiatrist found this. It's just, he seemed like he was very sly, let's just say. I also believe that the main crux of him wanting to kill these partners is because he was angry with them. He was angry that they did not want to be what he wanted them to be. It seems like he was always looking for a commitment, but he was so suffocating when he did it. Oh, I think I chose a bad play on words there, but he was so intense in his wanting this commitment and wanting full and complete control and wanting all of that power that it scared people away. Obviously, these men did not want to commit to him. There must have been reasons for it, even as far back as his first affair. Now, I don't know if the first affair with a man, if the other man was married or not, but even as far back as his first fully out relationship, this man didn't want to commit to him either. We already did talk about the fact that there was a lot of bias in the police force. There's still a lot of bias in the police force. I am not going to say that the police deal as well with the community as they should. They're there to serve and protect, and it doesn't seem like they either served nor protected these men. Even as recent as 2016, guys, they went to one of the parks and rounded up a bunch of men and arrested them, and the police would be responsible for outing them. If some of them were teachers, the police would call up the school and be like, Mr. Such and Such, we found him at the park. We arrested him for engaging in relations with another man. Like, I mean, as of 2016, they did this. So we know there's still a lot of prejudice, but this case forced the police force to take a look at its inner workings and to acknowledge that they had been biased and prejudiced against the community, and to want to work on things, to want to have a better relationship with the community. Now, if this is going to happen, it still remains to be seen, but it does seem like they are trying harder. Just one more thing before we just wrap this up that I do want to point out. With respect to the other village murders, because I know you guys have been waiting for me to say something about this. Do I think Bruce McArthur was involved in any of the earlier village murders? Now, he has been cleared in 8 of the 14 of those. Do I believe? Yes, I do. I believe that it's possible there's a couple victims that would seem like it's possible. If you'll remember, McArthur from probably 77 to some point in time in 79 when he moved to Oshawa had lived in Toronto. And he had worked at Eaton's, which was not far off from the village. The two men that I assume, no, I don't want to say assume, the two men that I think could be a more likely link would be Brian Lataki, who was 24 at the time. If you'll remember, Bruce McArthur would have been about 26, and he does seem to like younger men, 25, 26. No, I think it was in January that Brian was murdered, so he would have been about 25. He did like younger men. And just the fact that Brian was bound, tortured, naked, some of that fits in with the MO. He was also strangled. Some of that fits in with what Bruce McArthur did. Also, the last victim, which would be, Mr. Duncan, Mr. William Duncan Robinson. If you'll remember, with respect to him, I'm sorry. If you'll remember, neighbors heard a strange hollow sound. William was also 25. So if you'll remember, they heard that strange hollow sound coming from the apartment. This was in 78. Could it have been Bruce McArthur hitting him with a metal pipe? He was horribly mutilated too. We know McArthur dismembered his victims. The Mallory Crescent, house 53 Mallory Crescent was essentially a dump site. He either killed these men at his home or in his van. When I say they were found in the potted plants, I don't want anybody to just assume that parts of the same man were found in the planters. He would mix the parts together. And Hamid's parts were also dismembered and found in a specific way. I think they only found like 23 of his bones in the ravine. So parts of men were mixed in with parts of other men and in garbage bags. And unless you disturbed the soil or dug underneath the planters, which the homeowners would never have a reason to, because McArthur was a landscaper, because he was responsible for changing out the perennials and the plants, he would have been the one that had to deal with this. As for smell, I don't know. I would assume that there would have been flies. Because it didn't say like he covered them with lime or anything like that. It did not say he covered them with anything so that they wouldn't smell. But you are outdoors. So maybe it's possible that if there was a smell, people could have thought that it was from, farmland. I know it's Toronto, or a garbage dump nearby. I don't know the close proximities of that, but I'm sure people had other assumptions as to if there were smells. And that's even if they went close enough to the planters. I don't know how close they went. If they just looked at them, from out their window, we're basically saying great. I'm just trying to see if there was anything else. Oh, the last point that I want to make. If you'll recall, a lot of the men went missing over long weekends. The Christmas vacation, Easter weekend, Labor Day weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, Sarush in the summer, Andrew over Pride weekend. I believe there is a reason for this, because the owners, the homeowners for Mallory Crescent, had a cottage, and they would often go there on long weekends and during the summer. So yes, MacArthur would have dismembered and everything else, probably definitely at another spot. He didn't kill them right on Mallory Crescent. And then he would have the rest of the weekend or the rest of the time to essentially bury these parts, because he knew when the homeowners would be back. With respect to Basir, the same thing. He would have known when the homeowners for Moore Avenue would have been back. So that's it. That wraps it up, guys. I hope I have answered as many questions as I can for you. I hope this gives you guys the impetus to look into this even more if you want to. There's a lot of research out there. Buy the book From the Village. It's a really great read, so I highly recommend it. And until Bruce MacArthur gives more interviews, I don't know if we can find out, and I don't think we'll ever find out every detail of what he did to these people, and I don't think we'll ever really find out the reason why he did. That is probably, we can speculate on it, but it's probably something he keeps within himself. So until next week, in which we'll be starting a whole fresh new case that's probably shorter than this, I just want to leave you guys just with the pictures. Once again, just to bring up a picture of Bruce MacArthur before we go. So obviously we've seen this one in the news before. There's Bruce MacArthur, who was 59, incidentally, when he started killing people. Most serial killers don't start killing at 59, if you'll remember. And he was active because he was in the process when he was with John and they busted in, and he would have been 66 years old at that time. So he is one of the world's oldest serial killers, definitely Canada's oldest serial killer. I would say one of the world's, but he is not the world's. There's a man named Ray Copeland who was 71 in the early 80s in the States who started killing when he was 71. That's a question that I'm going to leave with you guys. Maybe you'll have some answers for it. What do you think? Did MacArthur start killing before? Do we know of anybody else that really started essentially killing when they were in their 50s? Most killers kill in their 20s, their 30s, possibly their 40s. Most of them don't start at 59. And just to leave you with the last creepy photograph, there is him as Santa Claus, which still creeps me out. Although if you look at his eyes, they do look strange. So that's it for today, guys. Hopefully you'll have a really great week, and I'll see you guys next week with a new case. Let me know what you thought of this. And as always, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and share. I'll talk to you guys later.